Talking about the trade deadline. This year, there's only one of them, right? In the past, they had
exactly.
been able to do it twice.
Big difference from last year.
So the end of the month, the 31st is when it all comes down. And I thought in the last week, it's about starting now, I thought there was going to be a flurry of activities, and I still expect a flurry of activities. Let's take a look and see what the Indians have done with the trading deadline starting almost 2 decades ago. Look at that, D-Man. You've got one of the great trades in Cleveland Indians history when you think about it. Could have been better if they knew what to do with Brandon-Phillips. But June 27, 2002, Expos trade Cliff Lee, Grady-Sizemore, Brandon-Phillips, and Lee Stevens, left-handed hitting first baseman, to the Indians for Bartolo-Colon and Tim Drew. Then on the 30th of June 2006, the Mariners trade asdrubal-cabrera. The Indians, of course, needed somebody to fill in once Omar wasn't here. That trade for Eduardo Perez of the MLB Network. July 26, 2006, Mariners trade Shin-Soo-Choo and Sean Nottingham. I don't remember hearing the name Sean Nottingham, to the Indians for first baseman Ben-broussard. It continues on, and this going in 2008. The Brewers trade Matt-LaPorta, Zach Jackson, and Rob Bryson, and Michael-Brantley. I don't know whatever happened to him, for cc-Sabathia. Sabathia helps Milwaukee go to the postseason.
And we didn't know it was Brantley at the time.
We didn't. We had a choice of 3 guys,
yes.
right?
Yes.
July 26, 2008, Dodgers trade Carlos-Santana and John Malone to the Indians for Casey Blake. I say just trading Casey Blake away from us is a good enough trade.
Wow.
Right? July 29, 2009, Phillies trade Carlos-Carrasco, Jason Donald, Lou-Marson, and Jason Knapp to the Indians for Cliff Lee and Ben Francisco. D-Man, correct me if I'm wrong. Lou-Marson, or I'm sorry, go back, Brian, go back one page there if you can do that. The trade there with Jason Donald, was he or was he not the player that should have been the 27th out in the perfect game at Detroit?
100%. Armando Galarraga, he gets the ground ball to the right side. Galarraga covers. Donald is clearly out, and Jim Joyce kicks the call.
All right, let's continue on then. The next page shows us in 2010, Padres trade this guy named Corey-Kluber to the Indians. They get Ryan-Ludwick, power-hitting outfielder, to the Padres. The Indians send Jake-Westbrook and Nick Greenwood to the Cardinals.
Look at that theft on August 7, 2014.
Well, Vinnie-Pestano had a nice career out of the bullpen, but he was losing it at that point.
Yes.
And Mike-Clevinger comes here and always said, well, what do we need a guy with that much hair? And he showed that he can pitch, so that's a good look back. All right, so what do you expect? The Indians 2 games out right now. Yeah. Who knows what they'll be in a week? What do you think?
Well, I agree with you. A flurry of activity is coming or league-wide, because there's so many teams that are technically in it.
Right. Or the wild card.
Look at the National League. It's a pig pile. Beyond a couple of the division races. The NL Central, for example, is wide open. Even the Reds have to wonder, have to pause for a second, and they're in last place.
All you got to do is get hot for about 10 days.
Yeah, and the fans of those respective teams are like, hey, why doesn't our front office purchase? So I think you're going to have a lot of buyers. You're not going to have that many sellers. The sellers market is going to be limited because some of the buyers are going to want to maybe move a guy that a seller is not going to want.
Right.
You know what I mean? I.e. Bauer. So I think what the Indians are going to do is judiciously buy. They will pick up a position player who has a resume, preferably an outfielder, but perhaps a DH guy, and you can bounce somebody around, or maybe a first baseman or whatever, but hopefully an outfielder. But the most important thing is he would be an upgrade somewhere over what you have. And I think the criteria for this guy, not only being an upgrade over what you have, is the prorated portion of his salary, the remaining 2 months of his salary, will not be devastating to your budget.
Right.
Because it's going to be a rental. They're not picking up a guy who's going to be under their control for the next 4 years, I don't think. I don't think that kind of guy will be available.
A week from now, or whenever that deadline hits, will Trevor Bauer be a member of the Cleveland Indians or somebody else?
He will be a member of the Indians, because even though the Indians have, I believe, offered him to whoever wants him, I think 2 things will be a stumbling block. Number one, you have a finite number of suitors. the non-contenders are not going to trade for him.
Right.
So now you've limited the contenders. Oh, by the way, those contenders need to have deep pockets in order to afford make the Bauer acquisition worthwhile. The contenders with deep pockets are not going to want to give you what you want in return for Trevor Bauer.
Correct.
Let's take, for example, the Los Angeles Dodgers. If you're the Indians, you start the conversation with, Clay Bellinger. And guess what?
And Jack Peterson would be nice.
But Bellinger is my starting point.
Right.
The Dodgers say, well, of course not. We're not going to give up an MVP. Okay. Well, then Jack Peterson, Verdugo, you start just ticking off names, and you say, I want 4 or 5 of them in return. The Dodgers say, no thanks, and the Indians say no thanks.
Right.
I think that's ultimately what's going to occur. The Indians will not get a proposed return that they believe is worth Trevor Bauer, and therefore they will say, you know what? We're fine with riding the season out with him.
Unless they say, here's those 5 guys you wanted. All right, here's something a little different. I normally would say don't even consider trading somebody that might be a PR disaster. Well, what might be a PR disaster with the Indians is if they traded Bauer, that's one thing. People would understand. They wouldn't like it, but they'd understand. But they wouldn't understand if it goes to the Yankees or to the Houston Astros and facing the fact that you might have to go up and face them in the postseason.
It's already painful enough that Brantley signed with the Astros, and you most likely will have to go through Houston to get where you want to go, among other teams. So, I don't see them trading to a contender in the American League. I think they would love to do a deal in the National League. That's why in the offseason, what did we hear constantly when it was Bauer-Kluber? We didn't hear many Bauer specific trade proposals, but when the Kluber trade proposals were out there, they were almost always National League.
Right, exactly.
And I think that's what the Indians want to do.